Water, earth, fire, air. Long ago, I didn't know anything about The Last Airbender. Then, everything changed when my best friend said, let's do a podcast. We could call it Avatar State Radio. 6,953 days had passed before I discovered Avatar, not the Blue Cats, but a 19-year-old cartoon. Like Aang, I have a lot to learn, but I believe I'll love Avatar The Last Airbender. Welcome to this week's Avatar State Radio. I am your host who knows approximately, as of this episode, 11 episodes worth of Avatar, and there's so much more that I don't know. But we're talking about episode 11 anyway, so it doesn't matter. Of book one, The Great Divide, I'm Kevin Gallagher, joined by...
Hey, I'm Mike.
Wait a second. That's not what the screen says.
The screen says Aang's a liar.
You know, the one thing I miss about, switching to this new platform is that the old platform allowed me to change my name every time we started a recording too. So I was able to throw on the last Podbender on everything. And now it's just my name. And
that is kind of silly.
Disappointing that I can't change it every single time.
No.
Unless there's Zencaster, unless there's something I don't know. Am I missing something, Zencaster? Please let me know. Anyway. So now, before we jump into this episode, remind me, was this the one?
This was widely seen as the worst episode of the series, not the greater Avatar world, because there is an episode in Korra that has a lower score on IMDb than The Great Divide. But yeah, historically, this is an episode that most people do not like, I guess. And I mentioned a trivia spoiler earlier. There is actually, in universe, they make fun of how this is the lowest rated episode.
That's so funny.
Yeah.
Is that the trivia?
That's the trivia. So I kind of I squashed it a little bit so that you don't know certain elements of it. But yeah, it's so funny that this episode is seen as one of the worst episodes. I knew going into it that it was one of the worst episodes, but watching it back, it didn't bother me as much as I thought it was going to. I thought that it was going to be way worse. But I do at the same time remember watching it the first time being nothing is happening here. It's a waste of time. If you want to talk filler episodes, this is the one to end all filler episodes, because this didn't move the needle in any direction, I don't think.
Well, I'll save my overall thoughts for the end. But I think my first note here, so it starts off with them setting up camp. And so my first note is, why did Sokka break the tent down? That doesn't help anyone at all.
I'm so mad.
He's throwing it. It is him and Katara are literally acting like little children.
Right.
And which, they're them, arguing with one another isn't out of the ordinary, but for them, and I guess very specifically Katara, to act so immature, and I get it, they are kids,
right?
But
you're talking about how mad she got and everything, right?
Yeah, well, and Sokka, they both got so they were so immature. And again, Katara stands out a little bit more because historically in the previous 10 episodes, while we've seen her get mad, she's usually the mature one, even when she's mad.
Oh, Kev, you're in for such a treat.
This episode, they are both so immature, and it feels like they were made this way to play up the Avatar's role, Aang, as someone who is a leader and someone who can solve problems.
Right. And in addition, to be able to put them on opposite sides of a conflict.
Yes. And the, kind of jumping ahead, both are represented by the larger tribes that are at conflict. And also funny is that, and I didn't realize that at the time when I wrote this note, but Appa and Momo are also having their own little fight that Aang also resolves.
The fight over the food.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Um, and the simple solution is you split it in half. You don't, Momo, you don't need this whole little watermelon thing. And
Right.
Appa, well, maybe he does because he has 5 stomachs, but he can split it with you. Um, so looking back now, as I'm looking at these notes, like this was all set up really uh to show Aang as a leader and a problem solver. And I it just at least with Sokka and Katara, it is out of left field. How immature they are. Not that they're fighting, but how immature they are about it.
I think you'll get a little bit more of them. You'll get like ups and downs. You'll get hills and valleys because, like you said, they are kids. You are still going to get some moments of them, and it's a cartoon as well. So you are going to get like the extra emotion that like kids enjoy like watching and everything like that. So like anytime Katara makes a funny face, that's like etched in my freaking head because she has the funniest mad faces in this series.
Yeah.
But at the same time, like you do see them grow, you do see them age, you do see them kind of grow out of some of those immature moments, but you're never going to be like fully away from them. So I do think that this episode definitely paints it in a way that is kind of unreasonable,
Right.
um, and almost unnatural as well. Because again, to your point, it seemed like it was built a certain way specifically to fulfill whatever the needs of the story required.
Yeah. And I mean, it really sets up the entire episode, which is about these two tribes who are Earth Kingdom tribes that have been attacked by the Fire Nation, and have been fighting themselves between each other for 100 years, which will be important later. And they are both trying to use the Earthbender guide. So they're going to so this is called the Great Divide, which initially was, I thought, about a Grand Canyon of sorts, and it's obviously about that. It's about Sokka and Katara, and it's about the Gan Jin and the
So
Shangs,
the Zhang and the Ganjins.
the Shangs and the Ganjins. And so it's about those two tribes who have been fighting for 100 years, learning, and Aang is now suddenly taking charge and quite honestly crushing the leadership thing. Like he solved Sokka and Katara's thing. He solved Appa and Momo's thing. All right, that's small scale stuff, but he gets these tribes who have been at war with one another for 100 years to like just shut up and leave leave their food behind and go follow this earthbending guide across the canyon.
That's correct. I thought you were going to do more with that. I was like, where is this going? No, he absolutely is showing like elements of leadership and things like that. But it really is kind of hard to see over how childish the leaders are acting.
Yes.
And their people and everything. It is very much I guess I could see again, so much of it feels like pandering. And maybe that's why people don't like the episode that much. Like of all of the episodes that we've seen so far, this is probably the most childish.
Yeah, I mean the adult leaders are, I mean, maybe they're not as whiny as Sokka and Katara were. But that, yeah, I can see why people do not like this episode.
Yeah. I don't hate it, but
right.
It doesn't, it's not on the realm. Like I wouldn't choose to watch it if I knew that it was coming up, because again, I don't think that it really adds a lot to the Avatar lore or anything like that. Like there's nothing that you take from this episode versus something like the episode where we met Boomy, where
Right.
at the time you were like, this feels like a filler episode. But like you got stuff that was pertinent to Aang, you got stuff that was introductory to the Earth Kingdom, and you saw like the way that they did things. Really, in this one, like maybe you could say like, all right, there's these weird kind of canyon crawler creatures, and we got to play on some Chinese words a little bit with the names of these people. Yeah, I mean the names. Well, we'll talk about that more during trivia time.
The canyon crawlers I thought were a great addition to the lore. They were neat little creatures who, at the end of the day, weren't super violent. I mean, they were violent, but they were hungry.
Right. I like how one gave them a hard time, and then somehow they survived against like 40.
Right. Well, they they learned the tactics of one. What it is, it was shown that Aang can okay. I see what these canyon crawlers are doing. They're really just after the food. They don't care about us.
Right.
They care about the food, which, and now no one was expecting the earth. And I don't even know if they gave this earthbending guide a name or not.
I don't think so.
But, he broke his arms because they brought food down with them. They both did. Both tribes did. And like, neither of them are right for the reasoning. One of the Gan Jin brought them down because, we just knew the other tribe. We knew that they were going to bring them down. And then the other tribe was like, well, we knew that they were going to bring it because they thought we were going to bring it. So we brought it.
We thought we would bring it anyway because they were already going to think that we were pieces of crap. So let's be the pieces of crap that they think we are.
And to Aang's point, even though like he gets lured into that custard egg or whatever, egg custard tart or whatever, despite that, like he's hungry. The 12-year-old is hungry, and he did the right thing. And he sees that these grown ass adults bring in all this food. Right. And gets so angry about it, rightfully so. Aang gets angry in previous episodes, but this is the first time that he gets angry the way a parent gets angry.
Right.
And he's
he wasn't just angry, Kev. He was straight up hangry.
Yeah, certainly by that point he was. And
let me mention as well, while Katara and Sokka imbibed of the food, I guess imbibe is only something you can do with drink. They consumed the flesh. While they ate as well, they understood the mission too, and they didn't bring in any food either.
Right. And like, if you're there, of course you're going to eat food. If Aang was with one of those camps at night, he probably would have also consumed the food.
Right. And both of his friends at this point were like, well, I don't care about Aang. Forget him.
That's so true. And
right? Let's add some context to this episode that maybe most people are missing.
That's true. Aang, Appa, Momo, and Appa flew away, so Appa wasn't even there.
Right.
He was probably enjoying luxury on the other side of the canyon. But Momo, Aang, and Earthbending Guide with broken arms were just in the middle, like at the top, presumably for no reason, like other than to like not deal with the children, right? And so had no idea food was being had because like they were far enough away that they couldn't see specifics, but close enough to see the two camps. So like Aang, Momo, and this earthbending guy, starving, doing the right thing, not eating food.
Day too, by the way. Like,
right.
I get being hangry, but like people were making a big deal out of nothing.
Right. And like I get it. Like if you go, I get hungry when I skip a meal, but it looked like it was maybe it was morning time, but I don't know. Cause like they were setting up camp at the beginning of this episode. So you would think that it's at the earliest lunchtime.
Right.
Yeah. So they all eat before they leave.
Right, and they chowed down too.
Right.
Like you saw that guy pull out like the turkey leg, and he was
leg.
going nuts.
So they all ate lunch, a hearty lunch. Like, why you're carrying turkey legs with you, who knows?
Right.
But so you're right. By the time they make camp, it has only been a few hours. So like you can't skip that meal. And like to I guess their credit, like they ended up not knowing when they were going to get out of the canyon because the dude broke his arms and couldn't earthbend anymore. Like that was a problem that they now face.
Right.
So
they probably would have got through a little quicker had their guide not been, screwed
right
up or anything. But like the other thing is like the real reason that they brought the food was just because they thought that the other ones were going to be assholes.
Right.
Like not one of them was like, no, I can be the bigger person.
No. And like, so like, yes. Okay. So the next day you wake up and maybe you had to skip breakfast too. But by the sounds of what the guide said is that like you would have been on the other side of that canyon and probably getting a late breakfast.
No problem whatsoever.
So you would have missed a meal, maybe gone a little late for your next meal, the breakfast meal. So it's like you're fasting. You're doing like I don't know, a 10-hour fast.
Right.
Something
and
that
if
we
you
all
hate
do.
each other that much, not one of you couldn't have been like, you know what, we'll go next. Like we'll hold back, we'll chow down.
Right. It's so crazy. And then but then that's when we see the canyon crawlers attack everybody.
And that's even before, or that's after we see the history of the two.
Oh yeah, I skipped that completely. I don't even have a note about that.
I mean, I think it was a fun excuse for them to do different art styles because both the Zhang and the Gan Jins had like different art styles for the way that they presented like their heroes.
Right.
And everything like that. And similarly, when Aang is telling his version of the story at the end, it's got another art style as well. Yes. But clearly the whole thing is, hey, our guy said this, and then our guy said this. And it just kind of comes down to like, I imagine it's a sort of whisper down the lane kind of situation.
I was thinking the same thing, Mike.
Yeah. There is very likely to what Aang, and we talked about this by the name that I have and everything. Like Aang is not telling the truth when he tells them. Well, here we'll get to that because that happens chronologically after the canyon crawlers.
Well, and to touch on the story of why they are been battling each other for 100 years, it also is like. Katara instantly takes to the
Gan Jins,
and Sokka instantly takes to the Shangs, and it's like, oh, they literally, even before you get to the story, like they're setting up camp, and it's like, oh, this is clearly Sokka style, this is Katara style. Like it was just like let's make a whole tribe out of these personalities of these two siblings.
Oh, you're putting a tarp in there to use as a blanket, my guy.
Yeah. And then so the food gets exposed. Aang loses it because like what you guys are assholes is what he's saying. Mm-hmm. And then the canyon crawlers come out and they, fight them for a little bit. Then Aang realizes that, you know what? They're just they're hangry too. They just want some food.
Exactly.
And like they learn how to crawl them up so they don't need the earthbender to actually get up.
I like how not one person screwed up putting a bag over the canyon crawler's head.
And like, again, maybe everybody in this, in time of war are able-bodied warriors, right? And they can figure out how to do this.
Yeah, and you figured like the slow and old and elderly and infirm, like Appa brought them over.
Right,
so
right. So I could, that's the least problematic part of this episode. But he throws the food over the ledge, or over the cliff, and they all chase it. So like clearly canyon crawlers really probably aren't that bad. Like they just want food. and maybe if you don't have any food, then you are the food. So maybe they are. Who knows? We don't know enough about them. They were cool little additions. I liked them. And then and it shows Aang getting everyone to work together during that whole battle scene to use the food and the sacks to get
your first glimpse of maybe like this relationship between the two tribes can be salvaged.
Even when they get to the top, they kind of like they show that mutual respect before going at it again, to which then we get to that third story and ultimately discovering that at the end of the episode, Aang's a liar. But that third story that Aang shows, because how convenient that this is a 112-year-old kid, and that he could like realistically sell this story. And he does a great job selling that story.
Oh yeah. Yeah. While it's happening, like I was like completely like of the mind that, okay, like, yeah, that's true. And Rihanna had to be like, wait a minute, wasn't this like bullcrap and it never happened? Like as we were watching it back. And I was like, oh yeah, that's right. Like, right. And here's the thing, from an audience perspective, we don't know the truth. Like, I don't really know what happened with these two guys. So I don't know, like, from the Gan Jin or the Zhang side or neither, what is true. And I feel like that might have been like one of the cardinal sins of the episode, was it didn't really get to the gist of what actually happened.
Right. I mean, listen, I guess technically something changed by the end of the episode. Like Aang's a better leader. I would argue that while this is a filler episode, I would argue that it does show Aang progress as a leader. And I'm stretching, to find that, because they also set this episode up for that purpose. Like that sole purpose of this episode was to show Aang in that leadership position.
Right. And you have to assume that like later episodes are also going to do that, because it's not going to be this one episode that puts that weight on his shoulders. Or on the show's shoulders for that matter. Like there's got to be more that shows us him learning how to bend, him learning how to lead, him learning how to be diplomatic, that kind of stuff.
In a more organic way than this episode presented it.
Right.
And you could, and obviously like the tribes changed too. Like they started off as enemies and they ended up being one tribe at the end. Right. And saying that like, despite our differences, we are one tribe. Like it turns out those two guys were brothers, quote unquote, because that's probably a lie.
Right. So I do have a question for you, because we pretty much wrapped up the elements of the episode itself before we get into some other thoughts and things like that. From the 11 episodes that you saw so far, where does it rank? Is it at the bottom?
I will preface this with saying that I definitely did not hate this episode. I enjoyed it for what it was, but it is definitely the worst episode so far.
Right. And I'll say pretty much the same thing. Like I went in there knowing that there was a bad episode, because I think like across the zeitgeist of Avatar fans and the fandom and everything like that, like enough has been said about this episode that I was aware of it, during the rewatch, that, okay, the quote unquote bad episode is coming. But like, I don't really think that it was as bad as I had prepped myself to think it was. And maybe that painted your experience as well, because I was letting you know, hey, the lowest rated episode is coming, blah, 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 blah.
Right. And I honestly, like, as I was watching it, I was like, I think this is the one Mike talked about. I think this is what he's saying is the lowest rated episode. And honestly, like, I probably, during the course of the last 20 some minutes, have like made it feel like it was like a bad episode, or like that I was down on this episode. But sitting there and watching it, I didn't think that at all. I was having a good time with it.
Right. I don't think that it's as trash as people were making it out to be.
No.
I mean, every series has to have a worst episode, right. So I could understand this being the worst one. But so the second question that I have is, historically that the M. Night Shyamalan movie has been panned as trash too, right?
Yeah.
What do you think, knowing the half of what you know now, is going to be the thing you like worse, this episode or the M. Night Shyamalan movie?
Oh, interesting. It's probably going to be that's a good question. My guess is the movie. My guess is the movie.
And it's a shame because Knight, you're my guy.
Yeah, and I like a lot of even his stuff that's not really well received. I usually find something that I like about most things. Like there's a lot of things that most people feel are trash that I don't necessarily feel are trash that I'll find something I like in. So I don't know, but I'm leaning towards the movie only because like I don't hate this episode at all.
Right.
And while it is definitely, as you kind of said at the top of the episode, it is definitely the most filler of a filler episode. You have to stretch to find the things that make it not a filler episode. And again, all that stuff that make it not a filler episode wasn't organic. Like this episode was created to make all those things happen. So it is, while it is the worst episode of book one so far, I don't hate it. I wouldn't skip it if I was doing a rewatch. I don't think I would skip it. I think I would watch it again.
Yeah, I didn't mind it so much. I wouldn't be opposed to, keeping it in. Like, I don't need to skip it during my rewatch of the series.
And I will say, to your point, I do wish that we know what like there was no satisfying conclusion to that tribe story. And that is something that I would want to see either done differently with this episode or explored further in like a comic book or something.
I've obviously dove a little bit into the comics. Like I ran on one or two or three of the comics, like the graphic novels for her birthday or for Christmas the one year. I don't know that they ever.
Probably not.
The universe is expansive and it can be like even more expansive. I wonder if they do kind of rectify that, because that is obviously like one of the biggest problems with this episode is that they don't get to the bottom of anything.
Right. But yeah, I mean, overall, I liked it. It is the worst, but I liked it. I don't hate it. I am still watching the show.
It didn't. Can you imagine if like someone gets to like episode 11 and they're like, no, that was trash. I can only imagine it gets worse from here.
There's got to be people, right? There had to be people that gave up on the show after this.
Right. So we'll do a little bit of trivia if you're ready for it. Yeah, it's only just a couple of things. So they went really big on the translations for this episode. Zhang is the Americanized pronunciation of the Chinese word for dirty, and Gan Jin's literally means the cleans.
Oh my god!
So they were just calling the one clan the cleans and one clan the dirty. And then just obviously like they went with like a more Confucius style look for the Gan Jins. And that belief was that like your parents gave you your body. It's not to be altered in any way, not even by cutting the hair.
Right.
So, and then some of the other things were like kind of aristocratic for the Gan Jins as well. Like they had like swords that were a little bit more like top level. And then they wore like wands that were over the top knots on their heads and stuff like that.
Yeah. Very cool. This is, I think, officially could end up being our shortest episode.
Right.
And I understand why. So with that being said, we are going to obviously play a game of redemption after this. And then just go into the Wild Wild West and watch more Avatar. You can find this show on avatarstateradio.com. Any pertinent links to the show will be there, but to be quite honest, that's probably the only link. All our social medias are kept on our personal pages, like at That Nerdy Kev on most social media, but you can just go to thatnerdykev.com and find everything I'm about. Mike, where can they find you?
So you can find me at tellus.com, patreon.com/tellus, and at I think tellus.etsy.com. We'll go with those three for now. And then maybe twitch.tv/thattellusguy.
There you go. And, before we leave, just remember, go grab that egg custard pie and enjoy yourself. Don't get hangry. We'll see you next time right here on avatarstateradio.com.